Yuri, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in our GVIP TV interview. Really happy to have you.
Norman, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Great. I have a couple of questions I want to go through because you've had a really interesting career, and your job right now is CEO of one of the WSP companies is really interesting. You have an interesting business. How important is technology to your business? And do you see important changes coming up? I mean, one of the things that we've seen all across the infrastructure space is how impactful technology is. So I wanted to get your read on what's really happening.
Yeah, so as you know, our business involves operating and maintaining infrastructure facilities, whether it's roadways or air terminals or fueling facilities. And you know, there's a little bit of a dichotomy that you run into with technology. Of course, 5G has the potential to really transform certain aspects of it. So for example, remote inspections and remote monitoring of your facilities and things like that can, it definitely has the potential for becoming more high tech. We've piloted over the last few years a much more sophisticated approach to maintenance management, for example, that really integrates our business, our field crews, our office-based staff, our billing and all of that kind of stuff with our customers. So there is significant potential, definitely. But at the end of the day, of course, you know, you still need to manage vegetation on the side of roadways and do striping and repair guardrails and take passenger tickets and so on. So there are those two aspects. I think infrastructure will always be a mix of the old world and a mix of the new.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think that's really important for people to realize. You know, I wrote recently about 5G, and one of my favorite clients wrote back and said, you know, that's well and good, but we got to build roads and highways and bridges, and he was right. Listen, tell us a little bit about your background. You know, from my point of view, you've had a very interesting career, but also a varied career, and that's interesting. You've got a PhD in physics from the University of Chicago. You worked for McKinsey for a very long time, and you've worked as a banker. And now you're working in the services, in infrastructure services business. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. Look, I think the one slight outlier is the degree which I've been accused of getting to satisfy my ego. But the rest of the career has actually been fairly coherent and pretty much centered around infrastructure. So at McKinsey, I worked with large infrastructure developers around the world, actually on pretty much every populated continent, and worked on huge mega projects, developing them, de-risking them, and so on. As a banker, I helped to finance them and transact them. And now, of course, the company that I run operates those same types of facilities. So, you know, to me, infrastructure has been a lifelong passion. I also have a real hunger and real passion for solving tough business problems, tough management issues. And so, you know, McKinsey gave me a great opportunity to do that. But you know, operating infrastructure facilities, particularly in the time of COVID, particularly under the current funding environment and in the current political climate, it brings lots of interesting business challenges to it. So there has been some coherence, but hey, Norm, as you know, if you only get to do this life thing once, why not have some fun and enjoy some variety, right?
That's a really good way to put it. Hey, listen, one of the things I wanted to ask you is you focus on North America, or you have businesses all over the world?
We have businesses all over the world. So our roadways business is very much focused in the United States. Our asset maintenance business, but a large part of our business is focused on the Department of Defense. And so we serve the U.S. military around the world, in the Pacific, in the Middle East, in Europe. So it's definitely worldwide. We also have a power business where we construct power plants around the world, not huge power plants, up a few megawatts, up to about 50 megawatts, but we are definitely capable of operating anywhere in the planet.
That's fantastic. Okay. Listen, one of the things you mentioned is the COVID crisis. How do you see the COVID crisis really transforming business? I guess, what stays the same and what changes? And you mentioned a really interesting idea that you like to solve big problems. Here's a big problem.
Look, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think a few things are becoming more and more clear. For one, I think commuting patterns were already slowly changing. Work habits, how people like to interact, that's been changing. I think COVID has really forced the issue around about remote working. And so those changing commuting patterns will really be important in the infrastructure industry, and will force people to rethink where capital goes, how does capital get invested, and so on. The other thing that we're seeing, of course, is with the huge amount of money that necessarily is going to support people for economic stimulus, to other uses. I think you'll see two different changes, or maybe accelerations of things that are going on. I think one is we will start to finally unlock, I think, the P3 dilemma here in the United States. The use of private capital is going to become more and more necessary. Now, whether this is going to be done well or not on a state-by-state basis is an open question. How quickly P3s get adopted, those kinds of questions will still be out there, but the private sector still has a huge amount of capital that it can invest. And when governments, particularly state governments, need to put their money into healthcare, into social programs, I think that's a good place to go to have some critical infrastructure built, maybe recycle some state capital and so on. Then I think the other important trend, and one that we as a company certainly are hugely in favor of, is performance-based contracting. I think there's a lot of DOTs out there that still have very much a service order mindset, very cozy relationships with their service providers, driving for minimum margins, minimum pricing. And we really are big believers in holistic life cycle performance-based contracting, the kind of regime that we see in Florida, for example, where we've made a big push to grow, and we're seeing that crop up in other states as well. So I think private capital and performance-based contracting to maintain the infrastructure that's already there are the two big trends that I'd like to see, and that I think definitely are likely to become more prevalent.
So, but why do you say P3s? You almost use P3s as a synonymous term to private capital investment, but there's all sorts of different ways. Performance contracting, or would you see performance contracting as a P3? Just trying to get it, because the terminology.
No, I think that's a good clarification. So I think for privately owned infrastructure where that exists, of course, performance-based contracting is with the owner of the facility, or the owner may actually self-perform that. But to me, there are many private ownership models that exist out there. But at the end of the day, I don't think you can completely remove government from the kind of infrastructure that we're talking about, right? And that's where the partnership idea is really important. I think the private sector can be responsive to the needs of users, to the needs of communities, but I think government needs to be there to make sure that the interests of all the stakeholders are balanced, that environmentally sound decisions are being made, and so on. So I think the P3 model, or the range of models that we all lump together as P3s, allow for that balance to happen. But it needs to be done in a smart way. There are a lot of jurisdictions that bring a lot of experience in how to do these things well. There have also been some really, really poor examples around the United States and other parts of the world. So we need to learn from past mistakes.
Yeah, no, I agree. We should continue the conversation, because I think we're missing a term in there someplace, because P3s, they're either defined very narrowly or very broadly, and
Yeah.
you exclude some other terms. Listen, one of the things that's really interesting, I'll go back to your PhD in physics and what you're talking about in terms of performance contracting, is that infrastructure is pretty much a data-free zone, especially compared to, you're at McKinsey, so you have to be sensitive to this, right? Because if you look at retail, health, defense, et cetera, banking, lots of figures, lots of data available, measuring yourselves against others. I was talking to a friend yesterday, I think, who pointed out the fact that there's no data available on infrastructure projects. That's simply, all of that's confidential, because it's, marketing, it has marketing and differentiating value, and that's fairly extraordinary when you can't compare the performance of different assets.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the point that you touched on there was availability of data, because I think that there are actually huge volumes of data, not all of it useful, and very little of it available to the public. So we know that state DOTs, for example, sit on huge piles of data, both ridership data as well as engineering data, right, on different asphalt mixes and how they endure under different environmental conditions and so on and so forth. But the reality is that the infrastructure space is very fragmented. It tends to be still in the public realm somewhat underfunded, right? And I would say that nobody has really come up with a business model, first of all, for coalescing, for gathering and coalescing data, and then really developing a revenue model to provide new services, right? If you think about something as basic as roads, sure, you can get creative about managed lanes and things like that. But really, that doesn't require the huge amounts of data that you see in other parts of the industry. So I think it really is important that, first of all, that the data is somehow standardized and is made available to industry associations. Those industry associations themselves haven't always been all that effective, right? So we, for example, belong to EMOSHA. Great forum for discussing how we would like to see the maintenance and operations space evolve. But at the end of the day, the ability of industry to influence DOTs, even around basic things like liabilities, is a very, very slow process. Data is just another level or two in sophistication beyond that. And then at the end of the day, you really need to think about user utility, right? So if a road is there and it's usable, the additional services, for example, that you could offer, I'll give managed lanes as an example, has value under some economic scenarios in some locations. For example, here in the District of Columbia, in the capital region, managed lanes are a hot topic, and honestly a controversial topic. Right, and again, they don't require those huge reams of data. I think once we get into the next generation of autonomous vehicles and things like that, I think it'll really transform this space. But it'll continue to be a slow process. I think once you have autonomous vehicles, once you have a 5G network, you open up the potential to really make transportation more efficient, reduce commuter time, improve the user experience in pretty fundamental ways. But we're really not there yet. We may be there in 5 years, but I bet 5 years ago, you and I were having that same conversation, right? That we're just about to see that. But I really do think in the next 5 or 10 years we'll see a fundamental transformation in the utility of data, and and in the business models, the revenue models that emerge from that.
Yeah, that's really, for me, that's interesting for a number of different reasons. One of the things I think a lot about, of course, is increased investment in infrastructure. And we did a survey, we probably did 7 surveys from the beginning of COVID until now. And one of them was really interesting because we asked people in the US and we asked people around the world, 2 separate surveys. How do you think about the infrastructure brand? And 90% of people around the world said the infrastructure brand was either weak or mediocre. 90%. Yeah. These are infrastructure executives. And in the US, it was 94%.
Yeah.
And I just think a lot of that is because there's just not enough data, not enough inclusion of the public in some of the fundamental decisions that we're making. So, I mean, I think the points that you make are fantastic. And, we probably need to have another conversation about infrastructure investment and how to unlock that, because that's a giant issue. That'll be the subject of the Yeary interview number 2.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about the user experience with infrastructure, and again, we do many other things other than roads, but if you drive down a highway repeatedly every day commuting, and of course people are doing that less today, but you see that there's some resurfacing work going on, and it takes weeks. You drive by, you see heavy machinery that's really not being utilized. Of course, you're going to have a poor perception out there of infrastructure itself. Instead of perhaps doing it at night when you're not interfering with commuter patterns, finding a way to create the right incentives with the private sector to do that. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do and should do to improve that perception in the public. And again, I'm not a consumer-oriented executive, all right? But the user experience really does matter, no matter what you do at the end of the day.
I think that's right. I couldn't agree more. Hey, listen, we're moving into 2021. What do you see as your biggest challenges and your biggest opportunities? And maybe we can even move into 2022, because whenever I talk to CEOs in the infrastructure space, they're very conscious about thinking in terms of 2 to 3 year chunks rather than the next quarter.
Yeah. Yeah, and we definitely take that longer term perspective within Louis Berger Services. WSP, our parent, of course, is a publicly traded company, but for us, because we plan 2 or 3 years out, the kinds of things as a business that we're concerned about are how the procurement model is evolving from state to state. What kinds of liabilities are being pushed on us? Are we seeing margin compression, for example, as companies start to struggle? Will they bid more aggressively and underbid jobs? We've gone through, as you know, a number of waves where companies underbid work, then had difficulty maintaining the roadways that they were asked to maintain, or the air terminals, the airports, right? The infrastructure out there, bridges, tunnels, and so on. And again, back to our earlier conversation, that just simply undermines the user experience and the perception of infrastructure as an industry. And we've actually been successful in picking up work down in Florida, for example, because some of our competitors have not done a great job in meeting the expectations of the local districts, or meeting the expectations of the users. So for us, going back to that aggressive price competition rather than delivering value is a threat. I think one that can be prevented through that performance-based contracting model and really being held accountable, maintaining those asset ratings and so on. I think for us as Lewis Berger Services, coping with growth in and of itself is going to be, I think, to some degree, a challenge. We're expected to grow at least 70% next year from this year. Some of that, much of that, is in the defense space. Some of that is in the asset maintenance space, the roadways market that I'm talking about. So we're very excited about that, but that puts a lot more strain on us in terms of recruiting, bringing on people. There's lots of talent out there, but you need to be able to absorb that as a business. And of course, COVID will continue to be a little bit of a wild card, right? Great news on hopefully a few vaccines being available early in 2021, but how quickly that will lead to a kind of an economic recovery, life getting back to normal is unclear. We need to keep our workforce safe, and it's something that we struggle with day to day. Our staff are out there in the field, interacting with the public, maintaining the roadways, looking after accidents, dealing with our men and women in uniform who are deploying overseas and so on. And so we need to make sure that they continue to be safe with our health and safety protocols. So that will definitely be an important focus. But I think you will start to see some pretty fundamental long-term changes again in commuter behavior, in how people like to work, how people like to interact. And so, for me, again, as an executive, when you ask me about my background, that's the kind of thing that I enjoy. Is the uncertainty creates opportunity. Yes, there's risk, but if we can maintain our pricing and our profitability levels, and capture new opportunities and have discussions with folks such as yourself about where this industry is going, I think we'll have a lot of fun in 2021.
No, that's great. Yeah, you're going to have a lot of fun growing at 70%. That's everybody who's watching. You're going to be their role model. So anyway, well,
I have a fabulous team in place, so I have a lot of confidence in them.
That's really great, though. Thank you so much, Yuri. It's great to see you again as well. And look forward to round two with you, part two. We'll do part two on the investment side, maybe in a couple of weeks, maybe sometime in mid-December, looking forward to 2021.
Looking forward to it, Norman. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Cheers. Great to see you. Stay healthy.